Hello, it's Kyle. Let's write some code. Today let's talk about prototypal inheritance. Now, if you're used to a class-based language such as Java or PHP or C++, prototypal inheritance may seem really weird, but I really encourage you to give it a chance because it's super awesome once you do. So I have here a basic setup, and I'll put a link in the description to getting this same setup working for you. So let's get started by creating a function here, and let's name it bear. Now the neat thing about JavaScript is that functions are also objects. So if I add a property type here and console log it out, you'll see that bear, although it is a function, it is also an object. So we can have a property on it, bear type equals grizzly. But I don't want one type of bear. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another function, and this time I'm going to capitalize the first letter of our function name. And this is pretty meaningless. It's just a developer convention to signify that you should use the new keyword to create an instance of a bear instead. So what I'm going to do is say bear grizzly equals new bear. And now when I console log out grizzly, you'll see we have an instance of our bear. And this lets us create multiple types of bears. So if we wanted a polar bear, we have two types of bears, a grizzly and a polar bear. And both are instances of the bear. So now with this, we can add an argument to our function here, and this is actually our constructor. So the type here, let's pass in grizzly for the first and polar for the second. And so every time the new keyword is called, it runs this constructor. And to demonstrate that, I'm just going to log out the type here. And you'll notice that we both get a grizzly and then a polar, and then we're logging out both of our instances here. So since this is returning an instance of this object, we can use this keyword to reference bear itself. So we can add a property to this object because functions are objects. So we'll say this type equals the type we passed in. So now on each instance of our bear, we could say grizzly.type, polar.type, and when we save those, it will console log out each of the types of bears we have. So now let's just log out the objects. And you can see that we both have instances of bears with properties that are different that were passed in through the constructor. So now our bears need to growl, and so we're going to add a growl method. And you would think that you would just simply say bear.growl, and then we'll call function console log grr. But this is adding it to this bear object, not the instances that we're creating of the bear. And so if I save this here, you'll notice that bear does not have a growl method, although our class object does have a growl method. So if I console this out, you'll see we have this function here. So in order to make this growl method available to all of our instances, we need to put it on the prototype. And so every object has this prototype property in which you can add to. And so we're going to say bear.prototype.growl. And now when we console log this out, you'll see that our class object no longer has the growl method because it's now on the prototype. But each of our instances now have this growl function available to them. And so from each of our instances, we can have each one of them growl. So let's make this more interesting and say this type, because we want to know which type of bear, says grr. And so when we instantiate each of our bears, we're given it a type here, and this assigns it to this type, which is on our bear instance. Then from with here, we use this type property to growl. And so now when we say grizzly.growl, it will say the grizzly bear says grr, and we say polar.growl. The polar bear says grr as well. Now maybe you're writing a grizzly bear and it's really complex that you really don't want to configure it in this instance, but rather you want to create another class called grizzly that inherits this bear one. And so what we can do is first let's just create another function called grizzly, and notice I'm using the capital letter. That means this is going to be a class. So now that we have our grizzly object function, we can inherit the bear by assigning the prototype of grizzly to the bear prototype, like such. But this is just making it equal bear, and so we really need a new object that's based off of bear prototype. And so JavaScript has a thing built in called object.create. So this is going to create a new object that's based off the bear's prototype, and we're going to assign it to our grizzly prototype. So essentially, basically, everything that we are applying, that we have on the bear prototype, we're going to just apply to the grizzly prototype here. So now instead of calling new bear here, we can use our new grizzly class. So we're going to say var grizzly equals new grizzly. And since this inherits the bear prototype, our grizzly instance will still have our growl method. And so when I save here, you'll notice the undefined bear says grr. Now, why does it say undefined? We should have a type, right? No. See, what happens is this is the constructor for the bear type. And in the constructor here, we are not calling the constructor of the bear type. So what we need to do is use bear.call this. And so what we're saying is call this constructor using this instance. And you can even pass in the parameters here. So since we know this is always going to be a grizzly type, we can say the first parameter, the type here, is grizzly. And so now any new instance of grizzly that we create here will always have the grizzly bear says grr. So how does it know to call the growl method here when we're calling it on grizzly? And this is known as the prototype chain. So how it works is if we just log grizzly here, we'll get an output of our object. And you'll see here we have the type grizzly, because this is set when we call it in the constructor. And then we'll have this proto object here, and the proto object equals the bear. And then in the bear, we have the growl function. So basically what JavaScript is doing is it's saying, okay, when you say grizzly.growl, it says, does this equal, is there a growl function here? If we change this, we say override. So what it'll do is it'll say, oh, yep, there's a growl function right there on that grizzly object. Let's just call that and we're done. But what if the growl function was on our grizzly prototype? Let's just add it there. If I can spell correctly. Let's just console log something out. Let's just say on the grizzly prototype. So now what it's going to do is when we call grizzly growl, first it's going to check our object and says, is there a growl function? Yes, it's there. So we're just going to call it, and why we get the console log override. But if it wasn't there, it's going to first check the grizzly object and say, nope, it's not there, and let's check the prototype. Let's see the prototype. Yep, there's a growl function available on the prototype, and why it logs on the grizzly prototype. But if we comment this out, what it's going to do is going to say, okay, first, is it on the grizzly object? Nope, not there. Is it on the grizzly prototype? Nope, not there. And since we created this object using the bear's prototype, it's going to go up the chain and say, is it on the bear's prototype? Yep, it's there. And that's why we get the grizzly bear says grr. So that was JavaScript prototypal inheritance in a nutshell. And it's worth noting that there's many ways to accomplish this same thing. This is just the way that works for me. And even in the next version of JavaScript, or ES6 or ECMAScript 6, they added some sugar for class keywords and extends keywords. And in doing so, it gives you more of a class inheritance feel that you would get in other languages such as Java or PHP or C++. But it's important to know that behind the scenes, it's still using this prototypal inheritance. So learning it is very useful and very important if you're going to be working with prototypal inheritance in JavaScript. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. I would really appreciate that. And if you want to see more, please subscribe. Thanks again for watching.